Hello again, and welcome to this November 26th edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me on this week's storytelling journey. Our guest on this Thanksgiving week is Drew Shirley. Let's find out more about Drew before we begin our conversation.
On today's episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest today is Drew Shirley.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Drew is a native Houstonian who has had two very different careers: attorney and television sportscaster. He describes himself as libertarian but politically homeless because there is no party that truly represents his views. He works as a personal injury attorney at a small plaintiff's firm and lives in Houston with his wife Jennifer and two sons, Jay, 18, and Luke, 16. And yes, he is serious. And no, he doesn't mind if you call him Shirley. Let's meet this week's stories from real-life guest, attorney Drew Shirley, and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
Good morning,
Good morning, Drew, and welcome to this week's podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. What would you like to know?
All right, so we're going to start off by telling how we got here.
Okay.
So the day after the presidential election, you sent me the following message, and you said, quote, "My friend, I must tell you with no pride and some embarrassment that I voted for Mr. Trump, a man that I can't stand personally. I feel no joy or elation today, but a sense of relief. I was wondering if you would be interested in a civil and respectful conversation about it on your podcast." So here we are. So thanks for reaching out. And I think we need more civil and respectful conversations in this country and fewer arguments.
I
I
definitely
do have some questions, but I'm mostly just here to listen to you. So I don't want you to feel like this is an interrogation. I'm sincerely curious because I'm trying to learn too.
I understand, and I appreciate that. And I know we haven't met in person, but we are Twitter friends at least. And I've always found you to be both respectful and reasonable. And I try to be the same way. And so that's why I reached out to you in particular, because I do think that a lot of the discussion in this country, especially about politics, has gone off the wires, and people are just shouting down from both sides or all sides. There's multiple sides, and people are only interested in their point of view, and they don't want to hear the other point of view. And I think that's a shame, and I think that has been driven somewhat by social media. In that controversy generates clicks, but I don't know. Maybe it's always been that way, and we just now have an easier way to tell somebody to shut up now. I don't know, but I will tell you a little bit about myself. I'm 55 years old. I'm a white male, as you might have guessed, and I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and I still live here today. Um, I've had a couple of different careers in my life. I went to law school after I got out of college, practiced for a few years, and absolutely hated it. And once I got my law school loans paid off, for the first time in my life at about age 29, I really asked myself what I wanted to do. And I decided I wanted to be a television sportscaster. So having really not much experience or knowledge of what I needed to do, I started pestering people to help me do that. And I ended up spending about 10 years in the media, mostly as a sports guy. I was in Colorado and then Louisiana, but mostly in Texas as well. And it was a great experience. I loved every minute of it. It is not really a career for you if you want money or stability. And unless you're Jim Nance or Al Michaels or one of those guys, it's a pretty tough business, as I know you're aware. So when I got married in 2005, I sort of realized I needed to do something else. And tried to sort of keep my toe in both waters, but I went back to practicing law, and I've been practicing law full time again since 2015. And I actually found something I enjoy doing, which is that I'm a personal injury plaintiff's lawyer now. And it really gives me a chance to help people and not bill my hours by every 6 minutes, which is a great benefit. And I've gotten the chance to go to court a few times, and about a third of my clients are crazy, and about a third of my opponents are crazy. So there's never a dull moment, and I like that. I never know what's going to happen when I walk in the door. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay, that's an interesting start. So nothing unusual about, well, I wouldn't say nothing unusual because it's not standard for somebody to go to law school and end up talking about sports on TV.
Right.
But you're a normal American who has political opinions. We'll say. So you mentioned you voted for Donald Trump, and we're about 2 weeks since the election. By the time this airs, 2.5 weeks or something like that. You, what are your feelings now, since in the interim period since the election? Do you feel, have your feelings changed one way or another since the election?
Well, let me go back a little bit and tell you and your audience that this is the first time in my lifetime that I've ever voted for the person who won the presidential election, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, that I've never picked the right guy. Now, I was eligible to vote for the first time in 1988, and I don't think I voted at all. I didn't care at all. In 92, I voted for Ross Perot, kind of because I thought he was a really interesting guy who would maybe make the government more efficient, and he wasn't one of the old heads, the old politicians. Um, then I certainly did not vote for Mr. Clinton either time. I don't remember if I just didn't vote or if I voted for their opponent or his opponents. I think I may have voted for Bob Dole, but I think maybe that was just because I liked the way Norm Macdonald did his impression on Saturday Night Live, and I wanted 4 years of that. So I've not always been a serious student of American politics by any stretch, but uh, I did not vote for Mr. Bush or Mr. Obama either time. I just didn't really like either of their platforms or what they were doing. But it felt like the situation was normal and you were choosing between two decently capable people who sort of understood what was going on. Um, I did not vote for Mr. Trump in 2016. I certainly did not vote for Ms. Clinton. I thought that they were maybe the two worst people in the world, and that maybe Miss Clinton was slightly worse than he was, but it was kind of a toss up. So I voted for the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson. In 2020, again, not interested in Mr. Trump at all, and certainly not interested in Mr. Biden. So I again voted for the Libertarian candidate, who's a woman whose name I can no longer remember. I think it was Joe Jorgensen or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But I did not know really anything about her other than that she was a libertarian, and I was not interested in either of the major candidates. And as you may remember in my tweets and communications that we had leading up to this election, I was really not planning to vote for either party, for Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris, and after Mr. Biden dropped out, I certainly did not like what the Democrats were saying, but I certainly felt like Mr. Trump was a pig and a clown, and all the things that you hate about Mr. Trump. I feel all of that. I don't care for him one bit, and I think he's obnoxious, and I don't necessarily think he's good for the country. But leading up to the election, I started thinking about the last 4 years and what we've been subjected to. And to be honest with you, it really just came down to the fact that I think the Democrats are insane. I mean, I really think that their policies are just off the deep end. And we can get into that more specifically, and I'm happy to do so. But I thought it was very important that we not have another 4 years of Democratic control. I just think that they have done terrible things to our country and made it much worse. So my vote was not so much a vote for Mr. Trump, but feeling like I live in Texas, feeling like Texas might be in play is what I kept hearing. That I thought it was easy for me in the past to just vote for a libertarian or not vote because we all knew what Texas was going to be anyway. There wasn't really much point, and I wasn't going to make a difference. Texas was going to be red either way. But I felt like it seemed like it might be close in Texas, and I felt it was important to cast my vote not so much for Trump, but against Biden or Harris or whoever the Democrats were running.
Okay, so again, to go back to the original question,
Yeah.
have your feelings changed about Trump one way or another since the election?
So my feelings since in the couple of weeks since the election is that for the most part, I'm very pleased with what Mr. Trump has been doing. I I don't know if this Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, I do not know if that will actually have any tangible impact. But the idea of having a government agency that is tasked with reducing the waste and inefficiency of the government is a terrific idea. And so I am hopeful that Mr. Musk, who has upwards of $250 billion and apparently does not care who likes him or who doesn't, I think he is a great person to potentially take a look at our government and cut all the things that we don't need. Now, am I happy with everything that Mr. Trump has announced? No, I am not. I think that RFK being in charge of the health department is ridiculous. I think he's a lunatic, and perhaps his brain has been eaten by some of those brain worms. But I don't really understand how we got to that point where he's going to be in charge of our health, and I also do not understand why conservative Republicans are trumpeting his appointment as if it's a great thing when the Republicans at least are supposed to be the party of small government, and it sounds like he wants to come in and ban a bunch of foods because he thinks they're unhealthy. And not to mention that he is super pro-abortion and can have influence on policy that way. So I don't understand why he was appointed. I don't understand why Republicans are fired up about his appointment. But so far, I think, and I'll be the first to admit, I don't necessarily know intimate details about all these cabinet appointments, who these people are, and what they were going to do. But for the most part, they have seemed to be made with an eye toward getting back to some normalcy and some common sense, which I think we have been sorely lacking on both sides, really, for the past 8 years. And so I am feeling cautiously optimistic, I guess would be the way I would phrase it. And that's not to say that I agree with everything Mr. Trump does, but I strongly disagreed with the Democratic policies, and I'm optimistic about some of those being reversed.
Okay, so you mentioned having voted for the Libertarian nominee or candidate a couple of times. So let's go small L. How would you define a libertarian?
I think simply a libertarian is, as a small L, because I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party and never have been. I think a small L libertarian is someone who believes what Thomas Jefferson said, which is that government is best which governs least. I think libertarians get confused with anarchists sometimes, and I'm certainly not that. And I don't believe that's what a libertarian is. I think that some government is necessary to maintain a society. And I understand there are drawbacks to a libertarian type government. It's not perfect, but I think it is the best way to govern the people is to leave them alone as much as possible.
And how would you define as much as possible?
Meaning, are you asking what my ideal government?
What are the limitations? What are the lines for you?
Right. Obviously, people who commit violent crimes should be incarcerated. Obviously, we need national defense to protect our nation from invasion and attack. I think um, we need disaster relief funds, for example, and I think we have to. I'm not one of these taxation is theft people. I understand that we have to have taxes to run our government. We have to have a court system. We have to have prisons. We have to have, um, functioning infrastructure and things like that. But when we start getting into what I'd call, for lack of a better word, social engineering, I do not think that is the function of the government. I do not think it is the function of the government to regulate what people do as long as they're not invading other people's rights. I don't think it's the function of the government to put their thumb on the scale of how they think people should be thinking or acting or talking or living. And that is one of the things that has concerned me the most about the Democratic Party, is this attitude that I feel like is sort of censorious, and it's coming from the extreme left wing of the party, but this idea that we need to shut down debate that we find to be harmful or quote unquote misinformation. You can see what is happening in the UK, where there are cops knocking on people's doors for offensive tweets that they made, or not towing the party line. And we feel like that can never happen in America, but I feel like the Democrats kind of act like they wanted that to happen, like they wanted to combat misinformation. And well, the only way you do that is pass laws against people expressing themselves. And that's not to say that I don't think people should be liable for fraud or libel or slander. If you deliberately lie and cause damage to somebody, I'm not an absolutist about free speech in that way, but this idea that there's some government entity that gets to decide whether what you say is information or misinformation, and you can be punished if you don't participate in the approved message, is, I think that's scary. And I think that some of the people who have some influence in the Democratic Party have no problem with that kind of stance.
Okay, so as a sort of follow up to that, what do you think about Mr. Trump's promise during some of his campaign rallies that he would be the retribution for his followers for things that they don't like?
Well, I think to generally respond, I think that Trump is a huckster and a salesman and a bit of a con man, and I think that he uses hyperbole sometimes, and I think Trump feels that he has been unfairly targeted by the Justice Department. I think he feels like he's been unfairly prosecuted for crimes that no president sitting or former president has ever been prosecuted before. I'm not saying I agree with that necessarily. I think that more of our elected officials should be prosecuted when they commit crimes, quite honestly. But um, if he's referring to, whether he's going to go after Democrats because they went after him or because they went after Republicans, then, um, I'm not a fan of that, and I'm not saying I support that, but let's take a look at January 6th, for example. Okay, January 6th has become this sort of symbol of, I think, a great divide in the way that people look at things. I mean, and as I am oftentimes, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I think January 6th was a terrible day, and it was horrible what happened. And the people that actually, kicked in doors, and people that actually were threatening members of Congress, the people that were that were rioting, those people should be sent away and put away. But some grandma that walked into the Capitol through an open door and just kind of looked around should not be getting prison time. I mean, and people should not be comparing January 6th to 9/11. And so there's some parts of the January 6th that I think were awful and need to be addressed with prosecutions. And then there's some people that I think are being way over prosecuted for what they did. And so if that's what he's talking about, I don't know. I mean, do I want to see him, take revenge on his political enemies? No. But at the same time, I think the Democrats have weaponized the political process to their end as well. And I think that needs to stop. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's kind of how I
Well,
feel.
it's your answer, so
Yeah.
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Whether anybody else thinks it's a good answer or not is not why we're here.
Right.
So tell me what your top issue was during this campaign.
Well, it's hard to say one particular issue, but there's kind of two things I think about. Well, number one is that I think stop the insanity was one of them. And I'll come back to the rest of it. And by that, I mean, a perfect example of the insanity I'm talking about is the transgender issue. Okay. As a libertarian, I don't have any problem with any person living the way that they want to live. If you are a man and you wish to live as a woman, you want to change your name to a woman's name, and you want to ask people to address you as that, I have no problem with that. Live and let live. But when it becomes a demand that you participate in something that is not based in reality, I don't agree with that. I do not agree with men being in women's spaces. I mean, J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, she is one of the most vilified, quote unquote, transphobic people in the world. She is constantly attacked. She's undergone death threats, rape threats. And her crime, if you go back and look up what it is, where it started, was that she thought that rape crisis centers and domestic violence shelters in Britain should be reserved for women only. That was her crime. And for that, she has taken endless amounts of abuse because people want trans women to be allowed into some of these shelters and crisis centers. And to me, that's insane. That is insane. Not because all trans people are predators or because all trans people are bad people, but because some of them are. some of these people that are seeking to find their way into women's spaces are bad people. Some of the people that are trying to find their way into women's locker rooms and women's restrooms and places like that are bad people, and they should not be allowed to do so. And that to me is a common sense position that has somehow become the target of a fierce debate in this country. Now, again, as a libertarian, when I think of like what private businesses to do, like if a private restaurant, for example, wants to say, this is our women's restroom and anybody who thinks they're a woman can go in there, that's up to them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they can let the market decide if that's a good idea. I think most people, though, are uncomfortable with the idea of men being in women's spaces. And the problem is that the debate about that has become so toxic. I don't know if you saw a few days ago, this has been since the election, where a guy on CNN tried to say, I think that a lot of people have problems with boys competing in girls' sports. And this other guy across the way said, I'm not going to listen to transphobia on this station. You're not going to call them boys. They are girls. And I'm not going to listen to your transphobia. Well, that's not helpful. That's not helpful, because not only is the person insane because boys are not girls, he's dramatically, silencing all opposition to his insane idea. So it's wrong in two different ways. So this compulsion and what really got me off track, and I was fine. I have a good friend who is dealing with this issue in his own family, and I don't want to give too many details, but again, I want and encourage people to try to find out who they are and find out where they're most comfortable living. And like many democratic ideas, I think they are based in good intentions. I really do. I think wanting to be more inclusive and wanting to be more accepting of all sorts of different people is fine and good. It's a worthy goal. But it leads to some devastating consequences when it leads to kids being given puberty blockers and, permanent medical interventions because they think they might be another gender or not. No, we're not going to do that. I mean, it's gone too far. It has gone too far. And when I don't see anybody in the Democratic leadership stand up and say, you know what, it's gone too far. We need to let people express who they are, but we're not going to perform surgeries on kids. The response has always been, oh, well, that's hardly ever happening. Or, well, we're just trying to affirm their gender. Or, it's just, I mean, that kind of thing is evil in my estimation. That kind of thing is absolutely unacceptable. And that's a prime example of why I felt it was important for the Democrats to lose. Not so much that I felt it was important for Mr. Trump to win, but that kind of thinking, it just leads us nowhere.
Okay, so let's bring it back home to Texas for a moment. So we're both in Texas, and Trump earned about 500,000 more votes in 2024 than he did in 2020. So do you get the sense that Texas voters are becoming more Republican or less Democrat here in this state?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that, well, it's hard for me to speak for other people. I mean, because obviously, I'm not a MAGA Trump guy, right? I'm not one of those guys. There's a lot of those guys in Texas. Um, those guys are not ever going to vote for Democrat no matter what. Never would, never will. Um, but could a more moderate or centrist Democrat like Bill Clinton, could he win Texas? I don't see why not. I mean, the problem with Kamala Harris was that she was the most left-leaning person in Congress, pretty much. I mean, and she tried to backtrack from all her agendas, but nobody ever asked her, well, why did you want to ban fracking and why do you not want to ban fracking now? And she was never asked to explain that. And so it just felt like a ruse to try to get elected. I can only speak for myself. I mean, um, do I think that Texas has become more Republican? I tend to doubt it. I tend to say no. I think that, I don't know. And now that I'm saying that, I don't want to pretend that I know what everybody's thinking in Texas. I do know that the conversations I have had with people is that people were just really disappointed with the Biden administration, with inflation and with seeming lack of attention to law and order and unchecked immigration and all these things. And while we're on the subject, immigration may or may not have been a big issue with Texans. I don't know. I would assume it would, because here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I do not agree with Mr. Trump's immigration policy, not at all. I don't think we should deport everyone. I think that immigration is one of the things that has made this country great. I think that anyone who wants to come here and make a better life for themselves and their families should be welcome to do so. I absolutely believe that, and I always will. And that goes from, anyone from, an intellectual elite from, Korea or Pakistan who wants to come here and become a professor, to a guy that just wants to come and, harvest grapes or clean houses or whatever it might be. All those people can make a better life here in America than they can in their home countries. I want them to be here. But, but there are some people that are coming here that are not coming here to do that. They're coming here to commit crimes and to plan terrorist attacks and to generally create mayhem. And I think the vast majority of immigrants who come here are not those people, right? I think that if you look at statistics, probably about 3% of the people who come here are bad people, and probably 97% of them are good people who just want a better life. But that wasn't my choice, right? My choice was let everybody in or let no one in. And if those are my choices, I think it is better to let no one in than to let everyone in. I don't know if you saw shortly after the election, or maybe even before the election, I forget. J.D. Vance was on ABC with a commentator. I cannot remember her name. Martha Raddatz, I think maybe. And they were talking about these Venezuelan gangs that had taken over apartment complexes in Denver. And she said, completely straight-faced, well, it's only been a handful of apartment complexes that have been taken over, sir. Let me point that out. It's really been only a handful. And I think his response was what I was thinking was, do you hear yourself? I mean, only a handful of apartment complexes. It's absurd. And again, this is insane. This is insane. If we're going to let people in the country, we have to vet them. We can't just let everybody in and not do any checks whatsoever, which seems to be the Biden-Harris strategy. We have to be able to check, are you a bad person who's going to kill people or plan terrorism or create mayhem in our streets? We have to be able to do that. Are you going to be a person who's going to lead violent riots in our streets, protesting on behalf of Hamas? I mean, these people, they should not be here. And as much as I want this other group, this other 97% to be here, it's worth it to keep out this 3% that we have to have some way of vetting people. So that's an example where I don't agree with Mr. Trump at all. But given the two choices, I felt like I had to choose Mr. Trump for that reason.
Okay, so if you were Trump's campaign manager, what would you have advised him to do during the recent campaign? And not just about that issue, but about any issue.
Sure. Well, I think that gosh, I don't know. I've never thought about that before, but I think I will say I think that their campaign was pretty effective. I think that the ad where he said, she's for they, them, he's for you. I think that was very effective because I do think that the transgender issue has become such a huge and fiery debate in this country. I think it was clear that a lot of people thought it had gone too far, and I think he tapped into that. I think he was wise to say that he wants abortion to go back to the states because strategically he knew that would upset the pro-life wing of the Republican Party, the anti-abortion wing of the Republican Party, but he also knew they weren't going to vote for Kamala Harris. I mean, the worst they would do is stay home. The anti-abortion wing of the Republican Party was not going to vote for Harris in any account. And I think he and his team predicted, and I think correctly, that they would still vote for him. Because the way it is now with Roe v. Wade being overturned is that it's up to the states. And what do we see? What have we seen in the states since Roe was overturned? We have about a third of the states that are very strict anti-abortion states. We have about a third of the states that are very strict pro-abortion states where there's pretty much no restriction on it at all. And then we have about a third of the states that are somewhere in the middle, which is exactly what you would expect across a diverse populace, across the nation with varying opinions. And so I think Mr. Trump really has the more moderate position on abortion in this race, whereas I think the Harris campaign thought that we're just going to say that he hates women and that we're all going to be in the Handmaid's Tale, but that's not realistic. That's not genuinely what he's about. I mean, he's now, you could say he has said, I do not support a national abortion ban and I will veto if it comes across my desk. Now, I would imagine that sometime in the next 4 years that there will be floated from the Republican Party the idea of just that. So we'll get to see this. Is he serious about that? Is he going to oppose a national abortion ban, and would he veto it? But so you might believe he's lying about it, but that was what he stated most clearly in the campaign. And then the Harris campaign turns around and says, well, he's going to have a national abortion ban. Well, okay. I don't think that's very effective to just, and so I think the messaging on immigration was effective as well, because he said, we need to stop the flow of illegal immigrants. And the response was, well, we're going to secure the border, or the border is secure, when everybody knows it's not. I mean, I just don't think that was effective. The Harris campaign really didn't run on anything substantively other than abortion and not being Trump. And I just don't think that unfettered access to abortion is a do or die issue for most Americans. I mean, it's not for me. I can't speak for everybody else, but that would not be enough to make me swing my vote one way or the other.
Okay, that leads me right into my next question. So, if you were Harris's campaign manager, what would you have advised her to do?
Well, I don't know where Harris is ideologically. I mean, I don't. She is her track record is that she's uh, very much to the left extreme. But um, so it kind of depends what they wanted to do. Did they want to run the ideological campaign that they believed in, or did they want to try to get elected? I think if they wanted to try to get elected, then they needed to rebuke some of the insanity that has come from the extreme left wing of the Democratic Party, like the transgender nonsense, like the abortion up to the point of birth, and you're not required to take any steps to save a child who survives abortion. I mean, I don't think people agree with that. Um, they should have had, instead of just paying lip service to stopping immigration, they'd had to convince the American people they were actually going to do something about it, instead of just what they've been doing for the last 4 years, which is nothing. Um, I think that they would need to come back more to a more moderate stance. I mean, they got to denounce anti-Semitism and denounce anybody in their party who is pro-Hamas. And again, that's not a huge portion of their party, but they've been in power and they have not done anything about these Jewish students at Columbia being terrorized by pro-Hamas demonstrators and demonstrations in the streets of DC and New York City. They haven't done anything about that or anything significant about it, you know. And so even though they pay lip service to the idea that they're pro-Israel, they have this very anti-Israel group in their party that is loud and demonstrative, and they're basically on the side of terrorists, and they should have been denounced and removed from the party. I think that would sit a lot better with the voting public than what we got. I don't know. I I'm not much of a campaign strategist, but I don't think the message got through. I don't I don't I don't know if that was the message they wanted to send. I mean, since the election, we've seen, and again, I know I want to emphasize, because you and I are Twitter friends, that we should understand that Twitter's not real life. And I agree, it's easy to fall into that trap, but I've seen a bunch of people on Twitter saying that the Harris campaign was problem because it wasn't left enough, right? It wasn't extreme enough. Well, that's just insanity. That's more insanity. The extreme left positions are not going to sell with the majority of the American people. They just aren't.
Okay, so I only have two more questions before we start to wind this down.
Okay.
All right, so now, what do you think is the best possible outcome for the next 4 years?
Well, the best possible outcome is I would like to see the economic burden on Americans lifted. I think we are all struggling. I mean, part of I'm sure you might think that, because I have been and am a lawyer, that I have no economic issues, but that's not at all true. I mean, first of all, I spent 10 years being a broke sportscaster, so that has not done wonders for my portfolio. So I have two kids that are about to go to college, and it's something I think about all the time, every day. And even though I'm starting to make some decent money, really for the first time in my life, the last couple of years, uh, I still have grave concerns about how I'm going to pay for my kids go to college and the rest of my life and retirement and everything like that. And I can see how things are much more expensive than they were 4 years ago. I don't know if it's twice as much or 50% or 30% or whatever, but it's worse, right? Uh, I don't want us to keep funding foreign wars, whether we're involved in them or not. I don't. There's so many places that we can cut our grotesque spending, and really, when you talk about the taxes that are on American people, yes, there's federal income tax, but we also pay sales tax and property tax and gas tax and you know, Obamacare. Even though I think the idea of helping people with healthcare is a good idea, Obamacare is a huge tax. I mean, Obamacare is has double the cost of healthcare in America. That's just the facts. And so, do I don't claim to know what the best way to stop that is, but I think that's a problem. Um, printing a bunch of money so we can send it to Ukraine is a problem because it makes everything more expensive. And inflation is like a tax. It is a tax on everything we pay for. And um, so again, like, and that's another thing. I don't really think that tariffs are the answer. So I'm not excited about tariffs being instituted on all foreign goods. Uh, Trump seems to be, pretty interested in doing that. But if it just makes everything much more expensive, then people will have a fit. I mean, people will absolutely go nuts, and he'll have to abandon that. There's no way we can do that. So that would be a step in the right direction. Um, lowering the taxes, real and imaginary, that we all pay, I think would be the best possible outcome. And just a return to sanity. And it's weird because I don't necessarily think Trump is sane, but I don't necessarily think President Trump is sane, but I do think that he seems to be bringing on people who are sane and who can influence policy in the right direction. Not every single thing, but I think generally speaking, I'm hopeful and, like I would say, cautiously optimistic that can happen.
Okay, I don't want to get into an argument about that issue, but I can tell you that point that you just made is probably what's going to cause people's heads to blow, based on who he has nominated so far. But
Yeah,
I don't want to get into those individually. Just to let you know, in case you have conversations when this
yeah.
when this episode airs.
You're talking about the cabinet appointments.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, okay. Well, we don't have to get into it, but
Yeah.
yeah. No,
And that
I
remains to be
understand.
seen.
I understand those are very, very controversial appointments that he's made, and I certainly don't agree with all of them. But and of course, the proof is in the pudding, and so it's too early to think about what yeah. I I'd be surprised if Matt gets confirmed as Attorney General. I really would be surprised by that. And so, but we still, as we're recording this, we still don't know what's going to happen with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last question I have for you today is, what do you think it's going to take for us to be the United States again? Because clearly we're not right now.
We're not. We're not right now. I would hope it'd be conversations like this one, where I think both sides, and maybe on any argument it's like this. I think both sides are guilty of ascribing the worst qualities in their opponents to all of their opponents. And I know you and I do not agree on a lot of political issues. I don't specifically know what they are, but I can imagine. And but I think I know that you are a reasonable and respectful person, and I hope you feel the same way about me. The problem that we've got into is that we think that because there are racists in the Republican Party, that all the Republicans are racist, or because there are communists in the Democratic Party, that all the Democrats are communists, and that's just not helpful. That's not helpful to anybody because, you know, I don't like being, I mean, that's one of the reasons that I felt very conflicted and maybe a little embarrassed about Mr. Trump because I don't want anyone to think I'm a racist. I don't want anyone to think that I'm a bad person. That's natural. I mean, and I think part of that is the reason that we do so much point is that if you can shame people, then maybe they'll come around to your way of thinking. And but I think people are tired of being shamed about it. I mean, I think it's a mistake to think that all Trump voters are garbage, and I think it's a mistake to think that uh, all Harris voters are, you know, commie pinkos that just want to socialize everything. I mean, it's not the truth. At least I hope it's not the truth. But both parties need to guard against the extreme edges of their party having too much influence because that's not where most people are. I think most people. I don't know. I don't know why libertarianism isn't more popular in America because we want to leave everybody alone, right? We don't want to tell you what to do in the bedroom or in your office, and and some people are like, well, that's no good, that's stupid, I don't know why, but for the two parties that we have now, and I did this was you know a more pragmatic choice that I made that I did think it was best for the country and in terms of being unified, I think people have to have conversations and listen to what the other person has to say and understand that it's not just because you're evil or you're bad or you're stupid. It's because you have a different perspective that's worth listening to.
All right, so that's a good way to wind this up, and it goes back to the purpose of this particular episode. So for me, I want to understand my fellow Americans better, and I also want those interactions to be respectful. At the tail end of each episode of this podcast that I've ever done, I always encourage my listeners to shine their light wherever they go. And I want to see more light and less heat in the way we interact with each other, in person and online. And I hope I was able to demonstrate that today in a civil, respectful way with Mr. Shirley, as he requested, and with interaction with people on a daily basis. I hope they can go back and say the same thing about me. I think
Well,
we learn more from listening than we do by talking. And but if we interact respectfully, we can learn from each other.
I agree.
So our guest today has been attorney and reluctant Trump voter, Drew Shirley. Drew, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Melvin. It was a pleasure, and I appreciate what you're doing and the respectful way you've approached everything. So, I'm a big fan of yours and a big fan of this podcast, and I wish you further success in everything you do.
I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Drew.
All right.
So that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go. And happy Thanksgiving.